Welcome to session 2 of Soothe Your Shoulders. Today we are exploring shoulder stand at the wall. So to begin this session, you'll definitely need some room to be able to lie down and move your arms around. And if lying down on your back is just not welcome to your body, for whatever reason, you can start seated and still do a lot of the same shapes seated. And then later on, towards the latter end of class, we'll need a wall space or the back of a door or just something stable that you can put your feet on. So with that being said, I invite you to come to lie on your back or find a seated shape. I'm starting really low on my mat so that I have room to move my arms. So you can kind of adjust as needed. And then we'll take a moment to just arrive. If you are lying on your back and your lower back feels kind of pinchy or uncomfortable, it might feel welcome to start by just pulling your knees in toward your chest, maybe even using your hands to kind of support your knees, and you might rock a little bit from left to right, just giving your lower back a little space. And then at any point, you might plant your feet on the floor. Option here to take your feet out to the left and the right edges of your mat, and then allow your knees to fall in toward one another. This is a constructive rest shape that allows your hip flexors and all of the muscles in your legs and in your core to relax so that they don't have to do so much work to hold up your legs. So you might find this shape welcome, but if you don't, again, you could find a seated shape, or you might decide to stretch your legs out long if you'd like to take up a bit more space. As always, everything in this class is your choice. I celebrate that you have the power and the freedom to make choice, and that whatever you choose here is honored. It doesn't have to be the same as what I'm doing. You can do whatever you want to do. This is your practice and your body. For the next 3 or 4 rounds of breath, I invite you to check in with how your body is feeling. What kind of sensations are present? Is there any area of your body that is feeling a little tender or maybe strong? How does your body feel right now? Because so much of this class today is about unfurling or kind of peeling back, it can feel really opening. And so you can just take your time with all of these shapes, all of these different options that we'll explore together. And the affirmation I offer to you today for this class is, I am creating space to release and receive. I am creating space to release and receive. It's so often in trauma healing that we only focus on what we're letting go of. But there's also a lot of healing in what we are receiving, what we're kind of repurposing that space in our body with. So today, as we open and as we peel back, as we unfurl, I invite you to not just release, but to also receive whatever it is that you need to receive. You might choose to stay exactly where you are, or if you're ready to begin moving, I invite you to inhale and reach your arms up overhead, resting them on the mat, right back behind you, just stretching through your arms, taking this moment maybe to kind of stretch through your back and your ribs, almost like you're first waking up in the morning. And then coming to rest when you feel complete. And we'll take in another breath here. And then as you exhale, option to bend your elbows like you're creating cactus arms. And you could hover your arms up over the mat, or you could keep your arms rested on the floor. It's your choice. And then inhale to extend your arms out into a T. And exhale to wrap your arms around your chest like you're giving yourself a hug. Notice which arm is on top, your left or your right. And we'll go through this a few more times in a little bit more of a fluid motion. And each time you could switch the cross of your arms if you want to. So with your next breath in, moving at your own pace, you could begin to inhale, release your arms and sweep them right up overhead. Exhale, bending into the elbows. Inhale, arms into a T. Exhale, giving yourself a hug. Maybe you change the cross of your arms. Let's take that a couple more times. Inhale, sweeping your arms up. Exhale, bending the elbows. Inhale to a T. Exhale to hug. One more. Inhale to sweep it up. Exhale to bend your elbows. Inhale to a T. Exhale to hug. Option to pause here for a moment. If giving yourself a hug doesn't feel welcome, you could always just place your hands over your heart. One or two more breaths, just breathing into this contact. With your next breath in, if you're ready to release this shape, you might slowly let your arms unravel. And then I invite you to place your hands over your ribs. And I'll be guiding you through a 3-part breath. So we'll start slow. We're not going to start directly into the 3-part breath, known as Durga breath. But we'll start with just a little bit of breath awareness. And just know that you could always stay there in your breath awareness if you don't want to explore the 3-part breath. If having your hands over your ribs doesn't feel welcome, you might place one hand over your heart, one over your stomach, or just simply let your arms and hands fall wherever it feels right. So for the next couple breaths, you might begin to bring your awareness to how your breath is naturally moving. You might notice what part of your torso is moving as you breathe in. Is it your chest, your ribs, or your stomach, or maybe a mixture? There's no right or wrong. We're just breathing here. We're just feeling what we feel. And then if you'd like to, you could stay right here with just your natural breath, watching it move in and out. Or with your next exhale, you might take a really full breath out, really emptying your lungs. And then a nice deep breath in, as if you could breathe all the way down into your stomach, all the way down into your navel. You might even feel your stomach begin to expand with breath. And a slow breath out, moving at your own pace. With your next breath, you could repeat that, breathing down into your stomach, and then maybe this time allowing your ribs to kind of join in. Maybe you begin to feel your ribs expand outward. Even if you use a few muscles to kind of draw your ribs apart. And a slow breath out. Slow breath in when you're ready for it, down into your stomach. You could allow your ribs to expand, and then this time allowing your chest to also rise if it hasn't already. 3 parts: stomach, ribs, chest. If there's any part of this breath that just doesn't feel supportive, you could release it at any time, no questions asked. And if this is feeling welcome, you could join me for 4 or 5 more Durga breaths, 3-part breaths, breathing down into your stomach, into your ribs, and then up into your chest. With really slow breaths out. Couple more breaths if you want to take them. Last one. After your last breath, you might decide to release any conscious focus on your breathing and just kind of check in with how you feel. Notice any effects of this breath practice, this pranayama practice. And if you have a block or a bolster, you might have it nearby. Preferably a block, but it doesn't have to be. You can just kind of set it to the side. We may or may not be using it. You have an option to use it. And then if your feet are really far apart, you might start to walk them in to hip distance apart. We're prepping for shoulder stand, so we want to kind of take our time and tell our body where we're going and give it a chance to open. So here, if you are in a seated shape, rather than bridge pose, you'll just take a seated cat-cow and move through some spinal movements as it feels welcome. And having your block nearby or your bolster if you don't have a block, I like to start, we're gonna move into a supported bridge pose, or have the option for one at least. I like to start at the middle height. Now, the higher your block is, the taller it is, the more of a stretch, the more intense that this shape will feel. And because we are still slowly moving into our bodies, I like to start either at the lowest height or the medium height. So you can choose for yourself what feels right. I'm gonna start at the medium because that's what feels welcome to my body, but you can do something different. And so then having your block in one hand, you could begin to press your feet, press your heels into the floor, lift your hips up towards the sky, and slide your block underneath. So where your block kind of wants to rest, just to protect your tailbone, kind of protect your anatomy, is it wants to be above your tailbone. So the block isn't actually on your tailbone, it's on your sacrum, which is above your tailbone. And then here, if this shape feels a little too open, too much exposure, feel free to grab a blanket, unfold it, and just place it over your hips, just to provide a little bit of covering and see how that feels. See if that feels a bit more supportive. And we'll give our bodies just some time to kind of open up here. Now, I want to bring some attention to your shoulders. This is really important for our shoulder stand that we're going to do at the wall. Right now, my shoulders are just in the same position that they were when I was lying completely flat. Now, you can leave your shoulders like this. There's nothing wrong with that. But to prepare for our shoulder stand, it's really important that we learn how to tuck and roll our shoulders. So if you want to try shoulder stand later on, this is very pivotal. So when I say tuck and roll your shoulder, I'm gonna shift my way over into my right shoulder now so that my left shoulder is now, I can pick it up off of the floor. And then I'm gonna roll my shoulder back and then place it back on the mat. Shift my weight over to my left, tuck and roll. So then you'll notice now that my chest is much more open, my shoulders are drawn back, and my shoulders are actually creating like this little shelf for my head and my neck. And then I'm being really conscious not to turn my head to the left or the right or even up or down. I'm tucking my chin into my chest to whatever feels natural. And I don't normally give this many cues in a pose, but this is really for safety. This is for cervical spine safety. And at any point that this just causes pain or pinching or just doesn't feel right, please give yourself permission to release it. Listen to your body. Take your time here. You might decide to join me in this shape for the next 4 rounds of breath, 4 to 5.
starting to find completion here. Kind of memorizing what it feels like in your body to tuck and roll your shoulders, to be able to call upon this again when you need it. And then if you're ready to leave this shape, you could again press your heels into the floor, slide the block or bolster out from underneath you, and settle your hips back down to the earth, untucking your shoulders, and we'll just kind of pause here for a second before we rush off to do anything else, noticing how you feel. That can be a really opening shape by itself, but especially when you tuck and roll your shoulders, it's a really big heart opener. So bringing to mind your affirmation, I am creating space to release and receive. You might ask yourself, what am I receiving in this moment? What do I need to receive? And just inviting that into your practice, into this moment. If you're ready to begin rolling onto one side, you might start to do so. And we'll just pause here for a minute. Or rather a moment, just kind of give our bodies a second to change shapes and rebound. When you decide to, you might join me in a child's pose, continuing to shift over onto all fours. And then you might decide to take your knees a little bit wider than hip distance. Touch your toes back behind you. And then your hips can head on back toward your heels. They don't have to touch your heels, but just in that direction. And then this is another great opportunity to use a blanket to cover any area of your body that just feels a little bit too exposed, or that would appreciate a little bit of covering and safety. Option one here in this child's pose is to rest your forehead on the floor or turn your head to one side. Another option, if you really want to keep your gaze up, is to just draw your elbows back. Maybe allow your neck to soften a little bit. Your gaze could kind of be to somewhere in front of you. And then just taking a breath here. One more inhale and exhale. Three options. Option one, stay right here in this child's pose. If you are just feeling really nourished by it. Option two is to shift forward into a tabletop shape and finding a cat-cow. So a cat-cow is to inhale and release your spine so that it's concaving down toward the floor, and then an exhale to curve your spine up toward the ceiling. Maybe even drawing your tailbone and chin in toward one another, and then kind of continuing this rhythmic motion with your breath. Option three is to find a downward facing dog. So you could tuck your toes from tabletop, begin to lift your hips. I start with my knees bent because I find that it's easier to create some space in my shoulders while my hamstrings aren't stretching just yet. And then you could release one heel down toward the mat and then switch it out for the other as you're ready. So these three choices, child's pose, cat-cow, down dog. What do you need in your practice right now? Do you need more stillness? Do you need more fluid movement? Do you need more opening? And then whatever you decide, we'll be here for the next 4 or 5 rounds of breath. And just know that because you chose one thing, doesn't mean that you have to stick with it. If you do one thing for a couple breaths and then switch to another thing, that's totally fine. You have nothing but options here. Nothing but choice. Nothing but freedom. All right, 1 or 2 more breaths. If you are in child's pose and you are ready to move on to the next shape, you could come into a tabletop or a down dog. And then if you are taking cat-cows, you could start to find stillness and either hang out in tabletop or downward facing dog. And then wherever you're at, option to extend your right leg out back behind you or not. And when you're ready, you could start to step your right foot forward as we come into a low lunge with our right foot forward. I mean, you could always step the other foot forward if you wanted to, but it gets too confusing for me to try and figure out who's on what side. So I just am gonna start with my right, and you know that you can start with whichever side you wanna start on. So whenever you get here, no rush, you could kind of adjust for a second, see how your body feels. And then I really appreciate some blocks. So option to use some blocks. I have mine at the highest height, but again, you have those 3 heights, so you can choose what works for you. If your hips are feeling really tight and like they could appreciate a bit more space, you could take your right foot or whichever one's in front and head on over to the edge of your mat. I welcome you to take a few easeful breaths here, just feeling into your hip flexors. If stillness just feels a little bit too intense, you could always kind of move in and out, maybe rocking back and forth or side to side. You can listen to the promptings, the messages of your body. Even if it's not something that I'm offering as an option, you don't need my permission. You can do whatever you want. All right, finishing out this next breath. And then you could continue doing what you're doing, or if you'd like to join me for a twist, you could keep your left hand either planted on your block or the floor. And then releasing your right hand, you could inhale. And as you exhale, you might begin to peel your right shoulder back, maybe reaching your right hand back behind you. 2 options. Option 1, you could reach on over like you're taking a side stretch and then reach all the way back like you're gonna pull something out from your back pocket. Okay, so option 1. Option 2 is to leave the twist, so right hand reaches down for the floor. Exhale, right hand reaches up towards the ceiling. In and out at your own pace. You choose what kind of movement feels right to your body. You can try both and then kind of just decide from there. Maybe you kind of mix the 2 together if that's something that you want to do. Whatever you decide, we'll be here for the next 2 breaths. After your last exhale, option to inhale, reach your arm back up and over. And then I'm gonna shorten my stance. So I'm tucking my back toes, lifting up on my back knee and just bringing it closer. I'm doing that because we're about to come up or have the option to come up. And I find that a shorter stance is just more welcome to my body. So you don't have to, but you might. If you'd like to begin to lift your chest, you could start to shift your hips back just a little bit. Lift up through your chest. And then just kind of taking a second here, noticing how you feel. Option to stay right here if this is serving you. Or option to find a clasp with your hands behind your back. So you could return to that tucking and rolling of your shoulders. You could roll your shoulders back, reach for your hands back behind you. Maybe you clasp your hands and release it down toward your tailbone. Or if this is not accessible today, you could bend your elbows and hold onto your wrists or your forearms. So you choose 2 or 3 more complete breaths here. And if you're feeling wobbly, you could take your front foot, walk it further out to the side. Last breath. If you're ready to release, you could bring your hands back down to your blocks, step your foot back, maybe stretch out your back leg a little bit. If your knee feels a little pinchy, just kind of give it a second. All right, 3 choices. Child's pose, cat-cow, or tuck your toes for down dog. 3 breaths here, so 3 inhales and 3 exhales, taking your time with each breath. Last breath. If you're ready to join me for the next side, you might either find your way into a tabletop or a down dog. Option to extend your left leg back behind you and then exhale to take a big step forward or a bunch of small steps, whatever gets you there. Option to grab onto your blocks. And then we'll settle in for a few moments of just letting our body take the time that it needs. Whether you are in movement or stillness, it's your choice, and there is no wrong choice. Couple more breaths. Last one. Option 1, you can stay here. Option 2, maybe you find a twist. If your left foot is forward, your right hand will stay connected to your block or the floor. Yeah, your right hand. I wasn't sure which one I just said. Releasing your left hand to be able to stretch, you could take a breath in. And then as you exhale, you could start to peel your left shoulder back. Maybe you reach up toward the ceiling, or maybe you reach back behind you towards your back pocket. And then you choose whether you want to find a nice lateral stretch right back to your back pocket, or maybe you go ceiling to floor.
You choose. Maybe you kind of mix it all together. Two more rounds of breath. Inhale, right back to center if you feel complete, because if you don't, you can just keep doing what you're doing. Option to step your back knee forward a little bit. And then if you want to join me for lifting up, you could find your way up. If you're feeling wobbly, you could take your front foot out over to the side, kind of widen your stance, widen your base. Feel here for a moment. And then your choice, option to stay here, option to roll your shoulders back and either clasp your hands or your wrists or forearms. And then notice here, if you automatically clasp your hands in the same way as you did last time, naturally that's usually what we do. And you have the choice here to change the clasp of your hands. It might feel really weird, but it's kind of nice to try. And it does change the stretch. It does change how your body enters into this shape because it is a different orientation. So if you're curious, you could try it. One or two more breaths. If you're ready to release, option to do so. Bringing your hands back down to the floor or the blocks. Stepping your foot back, and then option to find a child's pose or maybe a down dog if you're feeling like you need a little bit extra today. 3 full breaths wherever you are. Last one. You could choose to stay here, or if you're ready to move on, you can begin to lift your head, walk your hands back, and we're gonna start making our way to the wall. So I'm gonna move my mat so that the short end of my mat is touching the wall. This is where it would be really helpful to have at least 1 or 2 blankets. My blanket is folded up in a square. I'm actually gonna use 2 blankets, both folded up into a square. And I have notice I have the fringe facing away from me, and I have the nice sharp edges of the fold facing me right here. So this is how you want to set it up, and I do encourage using the blankets, especially if you have a tender neck or in fact, if you have had any cervical injuries, you might just avoid this shape altogether. In fact, it's recommended if you have any cervical injuries that you're still nursing, do not do this shoulder stand shape. It's not recommended. And in fact, you can just do a little cervical spine support by rolling up your blanket like we did in last week's class and lying flat on your back, using that fold on your cervical neck and just opting for that instead. But if you are going to join me in shoulder stand and you do not have any cervical spine injuries, then how we're going to measure this up is that when we do legs up the wall pose, our legs are up the wall and our glutes are close to the wall. So it might take a try or two to kind of get the measurements correct. But what I want is I want my head off of the blanket and I want my shoulders to be in alignment with the fold, this crease here. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm gonna bring one hip up to the wall and start to use my elbows to support my descent backwards. And so, wow, okay, I kind of got it on the first try. Wasn't expecting that. So you'll notice my head is touching the mat and my shoulders are roughly at the same length as the blanket. I could kind of scooch up again if I wanted to be really specific. So legs are up the wall. Your legs don't have to be straight. That's actually not the point. We're actually going to start with our feet connected to the wall. So for this first time, you could just watch me. I'm going to demonstrate it, and then the second time we'll go into it again together. The reason why that's really handy is because once you're in shoulder stand, you can't move your head left to right, or you can, but it's really not safe, and I really don't recommend it. So I'll show you this first time. So notice here my feet are planted on the wall. My head is on the mat. My shoulders are on the blanket. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start pressing my feet into the wall so that I can lift my hips. And then I'm gonna walk my feet up the wall a little bit. Notice that they stay roughly in alignment with my knees. Before I get all the way extended, I'm gonna shift my weight into one shoulder, tuck and roll my shoulders back. Option to clasp your hands here and get a little bit more. And you can walk your feet up a little bit more again. So this is our supported shoulder stand. And to come out of it, you would release the clasp of your hands if you have it, because you don't have to have it. A second option is to grab the left and right side edges of your mat once your shoulders are tucked and rolled. And then you can lower your hips back down to the mat. So that's how you would come out of it. Okay, so we'll come into it again together. So adjusting your blanket height. And then when you're ready, beginning to press your feet into the wall, lift your hips. Don't go up all the way just yet. Give your body some space to tuck and roll your shoulder. Option to clasp your hands or leave them unclasped. And then we'll breathe here. You can leave this whenever you want. You do not have to stay here. Or you might choose to stay here for another 3 to 5 rounds of breath. Couple more if you want to, or leave whenever. I'm gonna start releasing now. And then let's just hang out here for a second. You could either extend your legs up the wall, or if you just feel uncomfortable here with this uneven support with the blankets, you could roll to one side. Go ahead and move your blankets out of the way. And just rest here for a second. We'll start to move into our time of rest, our Shavasana. So if you want, you could just stay side lying, or if you want to set up a little bit differently, maybe even supporting your cervical spine.
you could take your blanket, either a square or not, and just tuck just the very bottom of it like that. So it was a square, and I just tucked it once. And then you could just lie with your neck on that little roll that you've created. You could also kind of adjust how much your roll or how thick your roll is here, depending on your neck and the kind of cervical spine support you need. And then you could extend your legs out long. You could keep your feet planted. Whatever works for you. You could also just stay seated, or you could explore sending your legs back up the wall, or side lying shape, or lying on your stomach. There is no wrong way to rest. And we'll be here for the next 4 to 5 minutes. And even though I'll be quiet, I'm still here with you. And there's nothing that you need to do or accomplish in this time. This is simply to just rest, just be. And you also don't even have to close your eyes if you don't want to. If you feel better just keeping your eyes open, that's always an option. And if you'd like to join me for one cleansing breath in and out, you might start by exhaling all of your air. And then we'll breathe in together. Shavasana.
There's no need to rush off if this time of rest is still nourishing you. But if you are ready to begin making your way out, you could start to add some small movements back into your body. If you are lying on your back, you might start to roll over onto one side. And then pause here for a second. And then whenever you're ready to find your way up, I invite you to find any seated shape. Option to leave your hands where they are, or you might bring them to heart center. Option to join me for one collective breath to close out our practice. Perhaps even bringing to mind what it is that you would like to receive, that you did receive in this practice. Acknowledging that, holding it in the center of your chest as we exhale all of our air out. And breathe in together. My hope for you is that you feel safe, connected, and at home in your body. Thank you for practicing with me.